Welcome to this 16th episode of Heydorn and Watson. And today we're going to be talking about social credit and the environment. That is to say, all of the implications, connections that social credit as a monetary economic theory has with environmental concerns of all types. And before we do that, though, Michael, we might explain to our viewers that if they are seeing you in a new light now that you're back in Australia, it's not because you've had a makeover, but because your internet connection is much better.
Yes, that's right, Oliver. Just recently, the internet service in my area here was upgraded by the local internet service provider. It was actually a state-funded, state-sanctioned internet service called the NBN, the National Broadband Network, which they've just implemented in the area that I'm living here, and this house has been recently connected to this new NBN, and it is extremely fast, like I've never experienced before.
Mm-hmm.
Some things that you download that could take 7 hours or 10 hours now will only take 1 hour, and of course the picture on my end is so vastly improved, and you can now see so much more of me in my background.
Mm-hmm.
Now actually look like a real person. Now that the picture quality is so vastly improved, which is excellent.
Right.
So,
yes. Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite impressive for Australia, or at least this area of Australia. It's finally catching up with the rest of the world,
Yes.
Which is good to see.
Well, as they say in Australia, good on you.
Yes, good on you, mate.
That's right. All right. Well, I suppose we could start by saying that the same basic dynamic that we were talking about the last time we spoke when you were actually here, and we were talking about social credit and migration, the same dynamic that's driving mass migration is essentially the same dynamic at play when it comes to the economic / financial causes of environmental degradation. Mm-hmm. So we have the situation in which there's not enough income being automatically distributed to offset costs and prices in the economy because of the way the financial system, the banking, and cost accountancy systems are set up. And as a result of that, every economy has to find ways of supplementing and finding consumer buying power, elsewhere, either by exporting more than they import, or getting consumers to go into debt, or getting the government and businesses to take on debt as a way of increasing production and distributing more consumer buying power that can be used to purchase and thereby distribute goods that have been produced in the past and meet past production costs, which is basically a way of sort of kicking the can down the road. So if the government engages in heavy investment and builds airports and harbors and hospitals, we won't pay for those things now. We'll pay for them sometime down the road. But the incomes that are distributed by that sort of public production can be used to buy the flow of goods and services that are coming onto the market from private production, for which insufficient income has been distributed. So it's a way of supplementing and sort of topping up the flow of consumer buying power so that it can be equated with the flow of costs and prices coming onto the market. So that basically means that in order for the financial system to attain equilibrium, some kind of equilibrium, it would never be an automatic or a self-liquidating equilibrium, but in order for the financial system to attain equilibrium, we basically, under the existing system, we have to have growth, continual growth, in fact, exponentially increasing growth. And the only kind of growth that you can really compare this to would be the growth of a cancer, where it's got to grow for the sake of growth, because if it doesn't keep on growing, the economy can't survive. We'd end up with having a recession because there's just not enough consumer buying power available to meet past costs. So in a system in which growth, cancerous growth, exponentially increasing growth, is not only incentivized, but it's actually necessary in order just for the economy to continue in operation, to survive, you can imagine that this creates an economic / financial environment that it's going to be inimical to any environmental concerns, because growth, the need for growth, the need for expansion is going to trump all other considerations, including environmental considerations. Environmental considerations, by necessity, will have to take a back seat. And so there's nothing, from a social credit point of view, there's nothing inherent to the nature of things why that must be so. But the idea is that under the system we've got, if that's a system, the software, the financial software we're going to operate, then that's the way things are going to have to be. But we can, of course, change the financial software. And we believe that if we did that and enfranchised people with additional income, additional consumer buying power, so that the market could always be cleared and all costs always could be liquidated, then we wouldn't need to engage in this exponential growth, this cancerous growth. We could balance the economy in other ways, and then actually it would become possible to take environmental concerns seriously. Right?
Yes.
And economics and finance would not be sort of the bottom line. We'd have a more flexible system that would allow for other values and other concerns to
that's right,
to enter into the decision-making process.
Yeah. No, that's right. Such as environmental conservation, for one.
Mm-hmm.
Because we really, at the end of the day, we must, we have a duty for not just for the earth's sake, but for ourselves and our children and our children's children, that we have a duty to take due care of the environment and the ecosystem, and maintain its integrity and stability.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we shouldn't use the things of the earth, the trees, or the land,
mm-hmm.
or the animals,
mm-hmm.
for our own benefit, but it has to be in moderation and in consideration of the stability and health and integrity of the environment and the natural ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If we destroy the ecosystems, we ruin the environment, we pollute and destroy the land, and say with excessive or mass deforestation, or polluting the rivers and the oceans, and hunting species to the point of extinction. We're going to ruin, not just the earth, but we're going to ruin the futures of our children, our children's children. We're not just going to ruin it, we're going to rob our children's,
mm-hmm.
our grandchildren, of the benefits of having the a stable and a healthy environmental ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and that's why this excessive consumption and production that is maintained by the current financial system and its policy of full employment is so destructive towards the environment, because it encourages production and consumption just for the sake of it.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it is really necessary for human beings to survive, but because we have to overharvest, overfish, overlog, and overbuild upon the land, just to maintain this policy of full employment,
Mm-hmm.
just so we can distribute incomes through that means.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it.
Right. So, yeah, so the idea is that if we had a social credit economy with, the necessary financial reforms, which would make finance a mere servant and displace it from its current role as master, and have it arranged in such a way that we can get the goods and services we need with the least amount of trouble
Mm-hmm.
and the least amount of labor, then we'd be in a position where we could ensure everyone had a decent standard of living without all this excessive, as you say, excessive production and consumption activities, and without this expectation that everyone needs to be working in the formal economy, with all the excess production and consumption that involves.
That's right.
And so, some people who are interested in environmental issues talk about degrowth, the necessity of having a smaller economy. Well, financially, economically, degrowth is impossible, completely unfeasible without monetary reform.
That's right.
So, and we're not saying, of
Absolutely.
course, that the economies must be smaller. It depends on the economy. Some economies could be smaller, and if they were more efficiently organized, nevertheless provide people with a very high standard of living. In many ways, I would say higher than what we have now.
Yes.
So it's certainly true of
that's
developed nations that a lot of the size of the economy is just composed of economic waste or economic sabotage, and it's not activity that in any efficient, effective way is aimed at serving human well-being or maximizing human well-being. So it's just busy work that we need in order to distribute profits and incomes, because we don't have a self-liquidating financial system.
Yeah, that's right. It's absolutely absurd. Yeah, and as you mentioned, the colossal wastage of human production that has produced goods, things like plastics, glass, steel, paper, all manner of things that are produced just to keep people employed or to maintain jobs and institutions and organizations that exist for the purpose of employing people and producing. The amount of this aforementioned forms of produce that get expended on these things and are just expended on these things and these policies that are not necessary to maintain or to supply all necessary goods and services. It just means there is a colossal wastage of human of produced goods that are obviously manufactured from the earth, but then are just destroyed, wasted, thrown away, or in the case of plastics, they get thrown back into the environment, and then they cause plastics and chemicals and all manner of other harmful synthetic products that are then cast back into the environment, and then they cause all manner of environmental problems, damage, pollution,
Yes.
harming or killing the local wildlife or what have you.
There was a BBC documentary on plastics that I saw recently. It was being advertised, I think, on Facebook, and I haven't looked at it yet, but it it's quite scary when you consider just what's in the oceans. What sort of industrial waste or consumer waste that ends up in the oceans, and how it affects wildlife, like you were saying, and it's quite frightening, actually. Now, I should mention that we don't want to sort of get on every environmentalist cause or on every environmentalist bandwagon, because without going into too much detail, while I think that there are serious environmental problems that we are causing and that need to be addressed, it doesn't follow that every environmental problem that is popular or is touted as a problem is actually a problem, or if it is a problem, that we in fact are contributing to it in any significant manner. So I may turn off certain people in saying this. It's not my intention to turn anybody off, but in the interests of sort of transparency and honesty, I, for example, personally, I'm quite skeptical about the claims of anthropogenic global warming. I won't use the word climate change because I think climate change is far too vague, and it's a concept that's set up in such a way that no matter what happens, the people that claim that climate change is happening can always claim that they're right, because of course the climate is changing. It's always been changing. It's never been static. So anything that happens, it'll take as sort of a confirmation of their hypothesis. And I think that was done because they couldn't sustain the claims of global warming, so they had to broaden it so that whatever, if it gets cooler in some places, well, that's part of the hypothesis. Now, this isn't a show on global warming or global cooling or climate change, or are we causing it, to what extent are we causing it. But I just want to make it clear that we're not blind ideologues when it comes to environmental concerns. I think that there are many genuine environmental problems, but there are also those people who want to push something as an environmental problem, maybe for ulterior motives, because if global warming is a problem, well, it's a global problem, and a global problem presumably requires a global solution. So then that becomes an argument for international governance and restrictions on carbon production, which of all the
carbon
things, carbon taxes and so forth. I mean, of all the
population control,
of all the things that you would want to eliminate or regulate, it sounds odd that you would want to control carbon, because I mean, carbon is one of the fundamental elements involved in life of all types, and of course, plants breathe carbon dioxide, and they use carbon dioxide to build up their own tissues and structures. So anyway, we don't get sidetracked into that debate, but it is something for people to be aware of. That as one of my Facebook contacts has said, he's an engineer, and speaking out of his own sort of expertise as an engineer, he says that he's never seen a corporate or a government sanctioned solution to some environmental problem that was not itself sort of dubious at best, and actually a worse solution than the problem that they were that they had identified in the first place. So as an example, you look at electric cars. Well, electric cars require lithium, which has to be mined, and that involves
That's
tremendous
right.
environmental damage because of the type of mining that's involved there, and
Yes,
also that electricity has to come from somewhere. So
that's right.
while
Which,
the car itself may not be using carbon fuels or fossil fuels, well, you might be charging up from a station that's supplied with electricity from something that is,
that's
so there are
right.
all these
Yeah.
contradictions as well.
So there's a lot of contradictions and hypocrisy involved in a lot
Yeah.
of so-called environmentalists.
Mm.
Like as you say, we've got to have all electric cars, but then where does the electricity for these cars come from?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the lithium batteries, like say in the Toyota Priuses,
Mm-hmm.
hybrid, petrol hybrid electric cars, which will ultimately, as they age and their shelf life expires, they'll end up in landfill, which will
Mm-hmm.
cause all sorts of problems. So there's a lot of environmentalists around today who say they're all about saving the environment, but really they're either hypocritical or inconsistent, or, as you said, they've got ulterior motives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Certain vested interests,
Mm-hmm.
especially those involved in high finance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If for whatever reason they want to trim the population down or reduce the population's financial security or
Mm-hmm.
material security, well, we'll just say, well, we've got to save the environment, so we're going to pop a carbon tax on them, or we'll try to limit their family size or restrict their ability to establish and build families and so forth, with all manner
Of course, as far as ulterior motives are concerned, we don't even have to go that nefarious. We could say, well, saving the environment or caring for the environment is ironically or big business, or could be big business. And if you've got to get people to switch over to all these other things, well, it creates new markets. So from a social credit
That's
point of
right.
view, a lot of this environmental concern could actually be more about increasing, again, production and consumption of at least certain things, and distributing more incomes in all these environmental industries. So it's sort of ironic.
Yeah.
The bottom line from our point of view is that if we had a sane financial system that operated well, that was functional, then we could produce everything that we needed, all the goods and services that people needed to survive and flourish, with the least amount of labor, and also with the least amount of resource consumption. So the idea is that a social credit economic system would be a system that met our legitimate economic needs with the least amount of trouble to everyone, including the environment, including Mother Nature. Right?
That's right. Exactly.
So,
perfect point.
Yeah. So that's, all these people that are looking for environmental solutions, but they're not touching finance, they're not touching the economic order. They're simply, um, sort of looking at the surface of things, and may actually be serving to further entrench the system we have by, again, creating new businesses, new markets, new reasons for production and consumption of other things, rather than sort of getting at the heart of the issue, what's causing the fundamental problem, which we maintain it's the financial infrastructure and systems and software that we're forced to live under, that more than anything else is driving real environmental degradation.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yes, it's really, it's the great elephant in the room that's just blatantly ignored by the world, and including a lot of so-called environmentalists. That is the financial system, the financial mechanism and software, as you said, and the policy of full employment, which is what is really doing the real damage to the environment at the end of the day.
I should also point out here that if we had a social credit economic system, not only would we have more efficient economies, so we wouldn't need all this excessive production consumption, but the government would also be in a position where if the citizens wanted it, if the citizens supported it, we would be able to direct resources to environmental conservation, repair, etc. So
yes,
finance would cease to be an artificially limiting factor, and anything that was physically possible and desirable, like reforestation projects, for example, we would be financially in a position to do under social credit. So as long as we had the resources necessary to undertake any particular program, like cleaning up let's say cleaning up lakes or cleaning up rivers or starting to clean up beaches in the ocean, anything, or reforestation, anything that is desirable from an environmental standpoint that we have the physical resources to affect, under social credit would become financially possible. Because the government, let's say, borrowing from, in your case, the Reserve Bank, or in our case, the Bank of Canada, would be able to obtain as much credit as is necessary to do whatever we want to do financially. So provided that had the support of the taxpayers, social credit would also liberate governments so that they did not have to kowtow to private financial sources, and they would be able to do whatever is necessary to deliver the sort of environmental policy results that the people of the nation want to see.
Absolutely. Financial sovereignty.
Financial sovereignty, right? Which then would give them economic sovereignty and also environmental sovereignty. So we would be able to exercise sovereignty over the integrity of the natural environment.
Yeah.
Similarly, we could say that a lot of the problems we have now, there are solutions to those problems. We have technologies which can reduce pollution significantly, and if those technologies are not being implemented to the fullest extent, a lot of the times it's because companies can't afford it, or actually consumers can't afford it. So in a system where consumers are not automatically enfranchised with enough income to buy back in full whatever is produced, goods that are cheaper have sort of like a double advantage over more expensive goods, right? I mean, in any system, cheaper goods are going to have an advantage simply because they're cheaper. But in a system where people don't have enough income, or not automatically given enough income to buy back in full whatever is produced by the community, cheaper goods become doubly attractive. And so companies have a huge incentive not to spend money on pollution-cutting technologies, even if they are available, because it would maybe make their products too expensive relative to competitors. And then, they would basically price themselves out of the market. But in a social credit system, you could actually, the public authority could say, all right from now on, we've got to make sure that whatever we produce is using the cleanest technology available. And because we've got a social credit system, we can ensure that however much things cost, consumers will have enough buying power to meet those costs. And so cost, again, finance money, ceases to become the bottom line, ceases to become the determining factor. And it's a question of what kind of world what kind of world do we want to live in? And once we determine that, individually and collectively, what kind of world do we want to live in? Finance is just an adjunct, it's just a servant. It's there to make what is physically possible and desirable real.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, perfect case in point. Yeah, so yeah, it's really, I think, just like with regards to dealing with technological automation of jobs, mass unemployment. Douglas social credit is the only truly effective means of caring for and looking after the environment. And because it will encourage environmental conservation, because as a state will have financial sovereignty, so it can create as much credit as is necessary to fund conservation projects. And also, as we mentioned before, the destructive policy of full employment that is maintained by the financial system would be abolished. So all this excessive production and consumption required to maintain full employment would be done away with.
And to maintain growth, constant growth.
Yeah, that's right. There would no longer be a need for that.
Right. Yeah, so there's a very interesting article that was written by Robert Klink in, I think it was 1990 or so, called Financing the Environment. And he talks a lot about all of these sort of issues that we've been touching on. And so I'll add that to just the description of the video so people can check that out. And the bottom line is that if you're an environmentalist, you have environmental concerns, you believe in green policies, you've got to look at this whole question of finance and the role that it plays in generating environmental problems, in generating destruction of habitats, the pollution of the air and the water and the land. You go right down the list. There's so many problems that we are contributing to. As I say, I'm not convinced that global warming or climate change is one of them, but there are many other problems that human activities are creating. And we need a financial system that would free us so that we're not sort of condemned to disregard environmental concerns just in the name of mammon.
No, exactly. Exactly. Right. Yeah. And perfect point.
As I say, if we make mammon a servant, then not only can we stop doing damage, but we can start to repair some of the damage that we've affected.
Exactly. Exactly, because the environment, people, humanity, and the environment will no longer be subordinated to the service of mammon.
That's it.
Instead, mammon or money, the financial system will be a servant of humanity and the needs and necessary requirements of the environment and the natural ecosystem.
Yeah. So the problem right now, a large part of the problem is that the environment is subordinate to finance, and as long as that situation of subordination is retained, there is no hope of solving, in any significant measure, any of our environmental problems. Even if we manage to temporarily solve one or mitigate one, it's just going to reappear. And so social credit changes that dynamic. Social credit would subordinate finance to human beings and therefore to the concerns of human beings, such as environmental concerns. And that would be the only financial economic basis on which we actually could construct an environmentally friendly society, civilization, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So people want to save the environment, get on board the social credit bandwagon. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. Yeah. Amen.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll leave it there. And as I say, I'll put that article up. If anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to post them in the comments section. And we will join you next week for another episode of Heydorn and Watson.
Yes, for sure. Okay.
Please subscribe.
Thank you, Oliver.
And thank you for watching. Thank you, Michael. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.